When I was in college for journalism, my absolute favorite journalism professor, her name's Linda Bowen, first day of class wrote $40,000 on the whiteboard and said, how many of you here are pursuing journalism for fame? A bunch of people raised their hands. How many of you are pursuing it because you think you're going to be rich or you think you're going to be like Ryan Seacrest? A bunch of people raised their hands. She pointed to the $40,000 and said, if you're pursuing real journalism, you're lucky if this is the amount of money you're going to make a few years into your career. Real journalists are not going to be rich. They're going to care about getting people accurate information more than anything else.
Welcome to the Unspeakable Podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Daum. My guest is Ana Kasparian. Ana is the longtime co-host and producer of the Young Turks with Cenk Uygur, which is one of the oldest news and political analysis programs on YouTube. It's been going for well over a decade. Ana is a bit of a legend in the political YouTube space. I'm thrilled that she came on the show to speak with me about her new Substack, which she launched in September. It's called Unaligned, and it is a manifestation of her move to the political center over the last couple of years. She's one of these people in our space who has started to see the world through a bit of a wider lens. So we talk about that shift. We talk about her thoughts about the election, about some of Trump's cabinet picks. We talk about choosing not to have children, which is something we have in common and has informed some of her career trajectory. It's a great conversation. I will say that Ana was a guest speaker for the Unspeakeasy, my heterodox women's community, earlier this year in Los Angeles. And so if you are interested in her and people like her and you want to hear more guests like that in person, go to theunspeakeasy.com and find out about our retreats. But that's not the point of this conversation. This is about Ana. So here's my conversation. Ana Kasparian, welcome to The Unspeakable.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. You were a guest on my other, the late podcast, A Special Place in Hell with Sarah. So now I get you all to myself. So thanks for coming
back.
Sad
that podcast has come to an end, but I'm glad you're doing this still. So
yeah, it's one of those, it's one of those little gems that, will just exist, in a certain place and time. People will be like going back, through an old record store and sorting through old vinyls, and you would find A Special Place in Hell somehow. Like I feel like
yes.
it's like that,
Yep.
Anyway, so you're very well known to audiences here. You are a well-known media figure associated with the left. You have been a co-host and producer on the Young Turks for many, many, many years. A couple of years ago, you had an awakening that moved you toward the center. You launched a Substack in September called Unaligned, which is doing extremely well, no surprise. So we're having a lot of conversations, especially in the weeks since the election, that use this word aligned, like a realignment, who we are aligned with, who are not aligned with. How do you define unaligned, and why did you pick that as the name for your Substack?
I felt unaligned was the best way to kind of describe where I'm at right now, politically speaking, ideologically speaking. And it's because of where the two dominant political parties currently stand, whether it's the culture of these two political parties or the policy stances they pursue, I just feel that I don't quite fit in anymore, right? And so a lot of my previous policy preferences remain, but, especially when it comes to the cultural elements of the left, generally speaking, broadly speaking, I just don't want to be part of it. I just felt that it was beyond toxic. And in fact, a lot of the policies that kind of ground me politically, I felt were being neglected. And in lieu of those important, policy questions, whether it be economic or healthcare wise or whatever, everything that we were getting from the Democratic Party was either this elitist, we're entitled to your vote because the other side is terrible, or let's just hyper focus on our identity differences and how unbelievably different we are from one another, and how the root of the problem is white people, right? Like, it's just, I felt less and less welcome in the party that tends to, agree with me on some of these policy issues, but had neglected those policy issues. And all I was getting was the negativity. So I just felt like there was also at the same time, an alleged realignment of working class voters toward Trump. I wouldn't say toward the Republican Party. I think Trump is very unique in kind of positioning himself as, a pro-worker, billionaire, which is really fascinating. But I just feel discombobulated with the current political landscape. And I do think there's a realignment. I'm curious to see how this all plays out and where it all ends up. I don't know. And I'm not going to bet on either political party. So I'm just kind of unaligned.
When is the last time you felt aligned with the left? Were you like a Bernie Sanders person? Were you enthusiastic about the Occupy movement? I'm really curious about your sort of personal history with the political left.
Right. Yeah. So I did agree with the Occupy movement, or at least what the Occupy movement began as, which was, it really was a symptom of the anger and frustration toward our government looking out for the very billionaires who destroyed the economy rather than looking out for people who were having their homes foreclosed and all of that. Like, the response to the economic collapse and the housing crisis that has basically stemmed from it made me like at least ideologically aligned with some of the Occupy people in the very beginning. But that kind of got co-opted by like this anarchist flavor that I do not agree with. I do not like. And I tend to see them as wreckers. They come in and they wreck everything with their ridiculous rules that are, we can't have a hierarchy. We can't have leadership. So that movement became about everything other than, the economic frustration that I agreed with. When it comes to the 2016 election, I did support Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton in the primary. But in the end, I ended up endorsing Hillary Clinton specifically because I felt that she was a better pick over Donald Trump. But I think that there was a seed had been planted during that primary, because I did see some of the behavior of the Democratic National Committee toward Bernie Sanders. And I thought that it was unjust, unfair. So I started to kind of sour on the Democratic establishment at that time. But it all kind of came to fruition recently, where I'm like, why am I so unbelievably loyal to this party that for several election cycles now has basically told me, you need to support us without us actually giving you anything other than constant demonization because of your skin color. We're going to erase who you are as an Armenian because of your skin color. And at the same time, all of a sudden forget women's rights while preaching all sorts of identity politics stuff that's actually deeply unpopular with the American electorate in general. So I just feel like there's nothing left for me with Democrats. It doesn't mean that I'm not in agreement with some of the policies that Democrats used to champion. I am still. But they don't really champion those policies anymore. I mean, what did we get from Kamala Harris? Why are you campaigning with Liz Cheney? I hate Liz Cheney. Okay, I hate neocons.
It's so bizarre. I mean, it's like you're in the Twilight Zone seeing that. I mean, I don't want to get in the weeds with Bernie Sanders at all, but since you mentioned him, do you think he could have won?
I do think he could have won. I mean, especially as Trump voters, and honestly, I give them a lot of credit for this because I've been pretty vicious toward them in the past. But now that I'm a lot more compassionate, open-minded, understanding, like, they have conversations with me, and so many of them wanted Bernie. They voted for Bernie, and then they ended up voting for Trump. So look, there's some analysis indicating that he would have won. He would have beat Donald Trump. I think what attracted a lot of voters to Trump in 2016 was his, populist messaging. But with Bernie, I mean, it was real, and he had an actual plan. And I wish we could have seen what could have happened if he won the nomination. But either way, I mean, it's not just what happened to Bernie that's made me sour on the Democratic Party. It's just the entire culture that currently exists within that party. Yeah. I mean, covering up Biden's mental decline was beyond the pale, to say the least, right?
Let's just start with your reporting over the last couple of years, because you're really a wonk. I mean, you love this stuff. I love the way you talk about local politics, especially. Like, you really get into it with, you're in Los Angeles here, and you get into like a lot of the municipalities and what's going on with local governance. But, in terms of something like President Biden's decline, were you like hip to that? Because I cannot believe the number of, pretty informed people who were like telling me that they thought Trump had dementia and Biden was fine. Like, what were you seeing?
Well, it's interesting because I remember questioning Biden's mental health back in 2020, and that got shot down right away. I mean, the anger from mainstream media pundits and all of that. So, I think we were effectively, and I'm just speaking for myself, and to some extent, Cenk Uygur, although he was more vocal, I felt like I was gaslit effectively on Biden's mental decline in 2020. But as I was watching him give speeches, and this is before the big debate where, it became clear to the American people, to everybody, that Biden's mental decline was a problem. Even prior to that, I would watch whatever speeches he would give. I would watch his interactions off the cuff, as he's traveling to and from Air Force One. And it was just obvious to me. It was so clear to me. I felt that whenever we would see him, you could see very clear signs of the mental decline, but we wouldn't even see him that often, which to me was another sign that there was mental decline, because they were kind of hiding him from the public or refusing to even allow him to take questions from reporters. Like, you could tell sometimes when he would have press conferences, he would want to stay to answer some questions, but his, staff would get off the stage. So it felt like something was being hidden from us. And when the debate finally happened, I just remember feeling really angry more than anything, like angry and also embarrassed on his behalf, because I thought it was cruel for this whole dog and pony show to go on so long that they would allow him to go up on that stage and humiliate himself, honestly.
One of the things that has been challenging me since the election is trying to have conversations with my friends on the left who do not understand why people would vote for Trump, who maybe voted for Obama or certainly Sanders, why there would be this decisive victory. What's so bad about Kamala Harris? What is it that people don't like about her? Is it the way she laughed? Obviously, it must be sexism, racism, all these things that we hear all the time. And I'm still trying to find a way to talk about this without like losing my patience or getting very pedantic or just sort of like giving up. How do you negotiate these kinds of exchanges?
So there are definitely people in my personal life who are terrified, who, have bought into some of the hyperbolic stuff that we've seen on like Morning Joe prior to Trump winning, that kind of stuff. And so I try to approach it from a place of compassion, because I was in their shoes once and I had the same fears and believe the same excuses for why Democrats were losing, right? It must be because there's a problem in the country with everyone, having racism and malice in their hearts. So like, for right now, for the people who are like particularly terrified, I don't come at them with, well, here's why Democrats lost. I just come at them with why I think, even though, the results are terrible, considering what they preferred, we're going to be okay. Okay, we're going to be okay. Like, let's not panic. Let's wait and see what happens. And I try to talk about how gigantic and bureaucratic our government is. It's purposely set up that way in order to slow people down if they are individuals with ill intent, right? Like, I think there's a reason why the fake elector scheme didn't work. Yes, it did come down to Mike Pence in that moment. Had he certified, the fake electors' votes, that would have been challenged, though, in the courts. And our Supreme Court, even though they lean conservative, are so obsessed with people's perception of their legitimacy. So they've actually ruled in certain ways that I didn't expect and was really happy to see. So I still believe in our system of government. And I think even if you've bought into some of the scary narratives out there about Trump being a wannabe dictator, I don't think I think our system will hold. I think that it will prevent, someone with ill intent from doing something incredibly terrible, like overturning our democratic process. It takes more than one person who has like a few yes men surrounding him to do that. That's the way I think of it. And I try to like calm them down. But, at some point, few months out, I think you can have a more substantive conversation with people when they're ready. It's just people are scared right now. And I don't blame them considering some of the stuff we saw in the press.
What do you think of what Elon Musk is doing?
I mean, look, Elon Musk, I want to be fair to everybody, but it's really hard to be fair to Elon Musk when you see the kinds of stuff he tweets on a regular basis. Like he's on Twitter all day. I get it. He's trying to troll the left, but he tweets a lot of unhinged things that make it harder for me to maybe take some of the good ideas he has seriously. So, if I would give him a word of advice, just chill out with the tweets a little bit. I know that MAGA loves it, but I think that there could potentially be some good ideas coming from you, and people are unwilling to even consider them, when he's putting like dumb things out there to troll the left. So that's where I stand on Elon Musk.
I know. So I feel like there's this thing happening where there's like a mode of discourse that takes place on Twitter, on podcasts, in this kind of like edgy, I don't know, maybe like new alt-right sort of heterodox adjacent space. And it's very ironic, and it's kind of coded in a way where you have to have this like whole other set of references to sort of get what people are saying. But now it's sort of been lifted up and moved into the mainstream. We saw this with JD Vance. I mean, I've talked about this before. I think JD Vance is fascinating. And like, I actually sort of get where he's coming from, and the childless cat lady thing didn't bother me at all.
Oh, interesting.
No, it didn't actually. Oh, we should talk about this because we're both childless dog ladies. But like a lot of my ability to metabolize this stuff comes from doing the other podcast with Sarah Hayter, who is, she's really young. She's in her early 30s. She's very much in this kind of like, I don't even like sort of this kind of tech kind of sort of was the new atheist space, but it's a lot of like really smart, like really high IQ, right leaning, people who are looking at the conservative movement as a very different kind of thing. It's a new frontier that most people don't understand at all. And I think Elon represents that, or is like interested in that stuff. And certainly Vance is, but it's just not translating. So like, what is your relationship to that ecosystem?
I mean, I guess I don't have enough of a relationship with that ecosystem because I don't understand some of the things that Elon is referencing, and so it comes across like he needs to consider that most people aren't going to get it, right? So those tweets are going to be up for interpretation, and those who want to interpret everything the Trump administration is going to do or everything that Trump is doing as negative, as dangerous, as scary, are going to interpret, Elon Musk's tweets as reinforcement for what they already believe or what they're trying the narrative they're trying to push out there. I don't know. I just think like I see a difference in the way Trump's base is behaving this time around compared to the last election or 2016 and the aftermath of 2020, obviously. I think it is a broader coalition of people. And I think that broader coalition has kind of pushed out some of the more nefarious people on the right who were like avid vocal supporters of Trump's. I think like Nick Fuentes is a good example of that. I'm seeing
he had his moment a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
This was the your body, my choice tweet.
And to like Trump supporters, I'm just talking about ordinary voters. Like they see how toxic these individuals really are in helping to grow what they're trying to grow here. And so I'm just curious to see where everything ends up, because even I didn't expect Trump to win the popular vote. Like I thought he was going to win the Electoral College. I kind of saw the writing on the wall, but the popular vote really did surprise me. And I think it's part of the reason why you're not seeing like a mass protest against Trump right now. I think Democratic voters, and I hope the Democratic Party is kind of waking up to the fact that there's some real flaws on the left they need to work on because the American people aren't happy. So we'll see.
So what do you think of this kind of trad movement. The pronatalism piece is really big with a lot of these, certainly with Elon Musk. I don't know how many kids he has at this point. He's not exactly a trad guy because he's not married to most of the mothers of any of them.
Right.
But JD Vance has talked about this. And again, this was something that Sarah and I talked about a lot, because I do think that there's a new framing of this kind of like family values picture that is still really alien to a lot of people who have traditionally been on the left. Like in their minds, the only people that talk this way are like old fashioned conservatives, moral majority, evangelical Puritan scolds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's like a whole new landscape here. And so I wonder if that's something that you've thought about, just in terms of like looking at the culture or even your own choices.
I hate the ideologues on both sides of this issue. So I think people should do what's right for them. Now, like there's a point made by some conservatives that I think is a good point, which is, equality for women, allowing women in the workplace and all of that has led to a situation in which now, both individuals in the household are forced to work. And there are women out there who don't want to do that. There are women who want to be homemakers, who want to stay home and raise children. And I really think it's important to have an economy set up that allows for that to happen. Like for me, it's about creating a society or a system that accommodates the choices or the desires or the wishes that the individuals in said family want. So like for me, I love, some of the traditional roles for women, like for me in the household, right? Like I love cooking dinner for my husband. I'm the one who does like 99.9% of the cleaning, but I enjoy it. Like I have like a homemaker side of me that I don't want people on the left to like look down on or judge as like, oh, you're so backwards. I love working. I love being an independent person, financially speaking. Like I don't need anyone to take care of me. And that's really empowering. These are the right choices for me. I don't have the temperament to be a mother because I'm very protective of everyone in my life, in my like family and close circle. I don't know what I would be like with a child. Like it scares me. Like I would definitely assault people. I have no question. So like, it's just not right for me. I don't have the temperament for it. That's okay. It's okay. I think more people would have kids, by the way, without this weird coercive pressure campaign. If we had an economic system or a country that was more supportive of people who want to be parents. It's so hard to be a parent in America. It's so expensive. And some people just don't feel that they have the appropriate resources to provide everything that kid would need. So that's where I wish the focus was for the right wingers who are engaging in the childless cat ladies, rhetoric. And for the left, don't look down your noses at people who want to be stay-at-home mothers. That is the most difficult job. I can't even imagine putting myself in those shoes. Hardest job in the country and an incredibly important job. So how do we create a system that makes everyone happy, regardless of what they want in their own households? That's a conversation I wish we were having.
Yeah. And I mean, but we should say it's prohibitively expensive in many cases to raise a family in the US, but the birth rate is down all over the world. I mean, we're seeing this in Scandinavia where they have, they have government help up the wazoo, and it's still not convincing women that this is something they want to do.
I think there's a problem look, this is just my speculation and I could be totally wrong. I really do think that technology has a lot to do with it. Like it kind of started in Japan. I remember doing stories about this like a decade ago where, young people weren't getting together. They weren't dating. Young men were dating like inanimate objects in lieu of finding a girlfriend. Yeah. And at the time it was like all fun and games. But now I look back at it and it's like, they were a little more advanced than us, ahead of the game when it came to technology. I do think that it's atomizing people further. And in American society, we used to have like, I don't know, bowling clubs, and people were part
bars.
of
people would go to
church.
Bars and they would, and they would talk. Well, they would talk. I mean, it's amazing because everyone's just looking at their phone all the time. And it's actually kind of risky to approach somebody in public and ask them out, right? I mean, young men talk about this all the time. It's unfathomable, actually.
Yeah. And that's the other issue that I think the Democratic Party needs to come to terms with and maybe find a solution to in regard to their messaging, because I think there's a reason why young men have kind of flocked over to the right. It's because of the way we talk about young men.
Yeah.
And so I do think they're terrified to ask, women out because of the way we talk about men. And when you like the Aziz Ansari thing that came out during the Me Too era is a perfect example. Woman has a bad date. He didn't do anything that made him even remotely close to a predator. But because she had a bad date, I mean, she made him out to be someone worthy of being included in the long list of Me Too, predators. It's insane.
Yeah.
That's not good. That kind of messaging scares guys.
Yeah. I mean, one thing about that case that I think stands out is that if I'm recalling this, there was some kind of sexual encounter and he wanted to do something where that you see in in pornography a lot, like some kind of sexual maneuver that maybe isn't so great. This is not a matter of going to like first or second base. This is like another baseball diamond somewhere in the distance. And like that kind of thing, I think, again, is a result of like so much pornography, people not understanding what intimacy really is, thinking that stuff that is really not pleasurable is pleasurable, thinking that you're supposed to be enjoying something that you're not enjoying. I mean, this is all a big stew, right? It's complicated.
Totally.
But I mean, yeah, like what's going on with men on the right, like the sort of red pill stuff you're seeing on social media, it drives me crazy because to me, the fourth wave online feminists made this. This is their creation. I mean, everyone who in 2010, 11, 12 was talking about I drink male tears for breakfast and toxic masculinity and boys are stupid, throw rocks at them, which I think was like a little girl's shirt that you could buy at Target. Literally, they just thought that was so adorable. Yeah, I mean, the sort of memification of men as bad people. It was cute. It was funny. I mean, and it always bothered me because women would say, well, because of the patriarchy, we can say terrible things about men, but we're effectively punching up, right? Because they have so much power. Like, so it's okay. It's like, well, and in fact, now they're way down below us.
And we're still punching. Like, that's the way it comes across. And it's like, I see. I mean, there was a feminist writer. I don't want to name names. I don't want to roll around the mud with this person. But, after Trump won, she put out this op-ed arguing that, it's all men's fault. And as a result, women should withhold sex. If you have a Republican husband, you should do away with him, divorce him. In fact, you can get an IUD, but you should really consider sterilizing yourself. It was just like super unhinged. And like, the main point, the foundation of what she was saying was this idea that men are dangerous. We should all be afraid and take like extreme measures to protect ourselves from these dangerous, terrible men. And I just don't think that she has a realistic worldview at all. I briefly talked about it on the show on the Young Turks, and she wrote another column coming after me for talking about it. Oh,
great.
Yeah, which I mean, I was amused by. But look, my point is, there are things inherent to like how, I don't want to say inherent, but there are certain things, certain characteristics that you generally associate with women, right? And imagine taking those characteristics as a whole and just putting it in the category of evil, toxic, divisive, dangerous, and constantly hearing from Republicans that that's what they think about us, right? We would hate it. And it's equally as toxic when Democrats do it in regard to men. And I do think that men are struggling right now. I don't think that we should make light of it. The fact that, some feminists, like the individual that I'm talking about with the column, think that this is all about like, men feeling entitled to sex. That's a ridiculous way of summarizing this. Yeah. It's not about that. Well, it goes way, way deeper than that.
Right. It's also just the oldest story in the world. I mean, this is Lysistrata. And apparently, so I think this columnist was referring to this movement. Is it in South Korea? Is this called like the 4B movement or something?
Yes.
Well, apparently I was hearing from somebody in South Korea, this just doesn't exist at all. This is like barely a thing. It's like a joke. Okay, it's not a thing. The holiday giving season is upon us. Have you ever wondered where your donation could have the most impact? In 2007, a group of donors had that exact question. But when they sought out information from charities to help them answer it, they just got cute pictures or unhelpful stories. Their experience led them to create GiveWell, an organization that would provide rigorous, transparent research about the best giving opportunities they found. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Thorough evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their website for free, and you can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell does not take a cut. If you've never used GiveWell to donate, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org and pick podcast and enter the Unspeakable podcast at checkout. Make sure they know that you heard about GiveWell from the Unspeakable podcast to get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or to find out more. Somebody like you, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts because you understand all this stuff intellectually, but you've made other choices. So we have both chosen not to be mothers. I've written about this a lot throughout my career. I edited a whole book about, people who make this choice. And this was I was kind of in the childless by choice sort of info business for a while. I would get called to, talk about this kind of stuff. I hate the term child free. I refuse to use it. I think it's so gross. But how has that been for you? Is that a decision that you deliberately made? You say you always knew that you didn't want to have kids. I have never heard somebody say that the reason was because they thought they would assault people.
That's not the only reason.
I think that's
it's a big reason, and I'm not exaggerating about that. I mean, look, I'm very much similar to my own mother, temperament-wise, and she definitely did things when I was a kid that probably should have gotten her arrested, and all to protect me, right? Like, I remember being on the corner in third or fourth grade, waiting for my mom to pick me up, corner of the school, and a few boys who were in my class slapped my ass as they were walking by, and my mom was turning the corner so she saw it. She stopped her car in the middle of the intersection, came out running with a rolling pin, okay, and just started chasing the boys, and even managed to get one of them, but just once. And if that happened today, I mean, she'd go to prison. I mean, we're in LA, so maybe she wouldn't go to prison.
She had a rolling pin in the car?
Yeah. My mom, that was her. Remember, this is the 90s. So that was her form of, self-defense.
That was her weapon of choice.
Yeah, that was her weapon. Exactly. Yeah. And I totally get it. I would probably do the same thing or worse. I don't know how parents parent in this country right now. I just see so much danger for kids. I'll give you another example. I mean, living in LA, I don't want to raise my kids in an environment where open air drug markets are totally okay. Come on. I would be beside myself every single day if I had a kid, So there's that, but there's also, I just knew from a very young age, I didn't want to be a mom.
Me too.
And that never changed. It never changed. I hoped that it would. Yeah. When I met my husband and was deeply in love with him, I'm now is the time that I should feel those feelings, but I don't. And I was really lucky because he's on the same page as me. There was never a moment where we had to debate it. He was, if anything, I was you're such a good person. I think we should have one. I feel like I'm depriving you of something. And he's no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to have kids. We're happy. Let's just live our lives the way we're living it and not let anyone pressure us to do something we don't want to do.
Have you gotten flack from either family or even listeners or your audience about this, especially as you've moved more toward the center?
Mm-hmm. Well, moving more toward the center on some issues, definitely I've gotten flack for. Deciding not to have children, yeah, I mean, I've gotten flack from my mom, and it's been painful. Like, I don't want to get into those details now. Maybe one day I will, but it is what it is. Like, she's not going to raise my child. I'm going to raise my child. And I've decided I don't want to raise a child. So it's okay.
Yeah.
So she's got to respect that decision.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I mean, I think that so much of this, we should frame this discussion as like people who want to have kids should be able to have more of them, because a lot of
Yep.
people who have them, they talk about how they can't afford to have more. They would like to have larger families. And then people who don't want to have them should not be coerced into having them. I mean, I think these two things can coexist. That's the thing, is I never understood why people said, oh, well, people who don't have children they're selfish. It's so disrespectful to parents. I think it's totally respectful to parents. It's the ultimate way of paying respect, because you're saying this is a really hard and important job, and it should only be done by people who want to do it.
Yes, definitely. I also think it is selfish, because you're making a decision based on what you want for your life. That's a selfish thing to do, and that's great. I mean, what am I supposed to do? Have a kid on behalf of other people?
Well, they would say, yes, you have great genes, you're smart, you're attractive, your kids would be amazing. How dare you?
Keep going.
How dare you deprive the world? They would almost certainly cure cancer.
I get the sense that of the parents who keep urging us to have kids, I don't think it's because they look at us and think like, you guys have great genes. No, I think it's, and maybe this is unfair, but this is the sense I get, like almost like a misery loves company thing. They're usually in the middle of like raising very young kids, and like they have no free time. They're sleep deprived. They're miserable. They tell you they're miserable, but then immediately followed up with, but it's also the most amazing thing I've ever done. Why don't you have kids? You need to have kids. I can't believe you don't have kids. You're not going to feel fulfilled at some point in your life. Like, it's always interesting when that pressure arises, like in the conversation. But overall, I respect their decision. And I also don't think like my friends having kids means like we need to live completely different lives and we need to lose touch. That often happens too. So I make an effort to like, keep them in my lives, because they're my friends and I care about them and I love them and respect their decision. And I want the same for myself, vice versa.
Yeah. And they almost always come back when the kids are older. And I have found now that, so I'm of the age where most of my friends, their kids are, in college or young adults. And even still, and they're much more relaxed. They're happy they have kids. If their kids are doing great, they're really happy. A lot of people are struggling. Their kids are struggling. That's a whole other thing. But I still find I'm like, yeah, I love observing this. And I like, sort of seeing how the kids turned out and hearing about them. But I have no envy whatsoever. I cannot imagine my life.
That makes me so happy to
any
hear.
other way. Oh, totally. Yeah.
Because I do worry like, there's going to come a day when it's no longer an option, right? And so that day's approaching. And so am I going to regret it once it's no longer an option? But I don't know. You can't really tell the future. So it always makes me happy to hear from other women who very consciously made the same decision I made and don't regret it.
Yeah. I would feel like I was in the wrong life. That's the thing. I always say, like, if I had kids, I would love my kids. I don't think I would love my life. And, that's something worth considering. Well, okay. So speaking of the jobs that you have chosen to do, you have talked a lot, you've written a lot, and you've talked a lot on different podcasts about how you really regret some of the reporting that you did when you were aligned much more closely with the left. You're very hard on yourself. And I think, as I told you, I think that you really should go a little easier. But, I think very poignantly, you have said, I had one job. I'm not a parent. I don't have a million other gigs. My one job is to report on the world, on politics, on the culture. And I messed it up. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, this is what the career path I've taken is what I've pretty much put all of my energy into, right? I've prioritized that above any other thing I could do, including hobbies. Like I grew up dancing, ballet specifically from like 3 to 19, right? And dancing is still a hobby of mine. And so but I didn't prioritize that even though I loved it. I didn't prioritize having children, nothing. I just wanted to do this one thing because I was passionate about it. Growing up, I, would watch Barbara Walters on 2020 every Friday night. And I just like really idolized her and what she got to do for a profession. And at some point I started to realize like there were specific stories. So I wouldn't say everything I've done I regret, but very specific stories that I covered and how I covered them, I regret deeply because they were negative stories about private Americans who were like caught on tape, acting poorly in the middle of some sort of tantrum, or someone who made an off-color joke or whatever. And like these stories always led to the same analysis, sometimes inaccurate analysis because we didn't have the whole story. We didn't have all the details. And the analysis was this person's a bad person. They should be fired. It would direct our large audience toward hating them and thinking of them as like, nefarious figures. And I have a lot of regret about that because I did get a lot of those stories wrong, number one. But even if I had all the details and I didn't report the details of the story inaccurately at all, what I was sowing into American society was so toxic and so disgusting. And yeah, I am hard on myself and I deserve it. Like I want everyone to know, like Meghan, I don't feel bad for me. Like I fucking deserve it. I totally do. What did I do to those people? They're private citizens. They didn't have big platforms to defend themselves.
Okay, but are they really
I'm disgusted with myself.
Okay, but wait a second. Were they really, who are we talking about? Are we talking about like Covington Catholic? That whole thing?
I never covered that. Luckily,
okay, so you didn't do that one.
No, like I think about Amy Cooper. I think about the way I made assumptions about Kyle Rittenhouse, like I fucked up. I really did. And so whatever, it's okay. It's okay to be hard on yourself when you've acknowledged and identified like what you got wrong and how it had an impact on real people's lives. With that said, though, I want to be clear about one other thing. I'm not a MAGA person. Like I'm not a big Trump supporter. I want to be fair in how I assess his second term. I don't think I was fair in the first term. I think I like bought into a lot of the fear mongering and stuff about him, but he is selling a bill of goods that does not appeal to me. So I want to be clear about that. And I think that there's like this big mistake right now among the left in general that like, oh, she is like writing off everything she previously believed, especially on policies. Mm-hmm. And she's trying to like, I don't know, grift to the right, which makes no sense. I still work at the Young Turks. Like grift from what? Like, what am I making money off of, if anything? Like I've really upset some of the more loyal audience members that I've had throughout the years, but I just want to do a better job. That's it. And I want to be fair. I want to be accurate. And I want to meet ordinary people who have no power in society from a place of compassion. These are not people in Trump's administration. These are ordinary American voters. And we should look out for one another as much as we can. At the end of the day, ordinary Americans should see each other as Americans, who should have the right to their own opinions, their own preferences, and all of that.
What are the topics that get you in the most trouble with the left?
I mean, obviously the transgender issue, even though I'm pretty far left in wanting to protect transgender rights, there's just a few areas that I think are more complicated and sticky because of the fact that you're trying to balance the rights of one group with the rights of another group. So look, I don't begrudge women who are uncomfortable with the idea of a transgender woman changing in the women's locker room, right? I can understand that, especially if someone has been the victim of sexual assault or rape. Like, I totally get it. So what can we do? How do we balance, the interests of these two groups of people? The same thing with the sports issue. I don't like the language that some of these activists push. I think it's degrading and dehumanizing for women in general. But other than that, I mean, I think that we should be like, I want to protect everyone's rights. And I think when it comes to important issues like housing, employment, access to public services, I mean, I'll be the first to fight on behalf of the transgender
But those
community.
are not in jeopardy. I'm not hearing about like trans people being, having housing discrimination. And if that's true, there's mechanism to deal with that.
Yeah, instead we're like focusing on like Nancy Mace and what she's engaging in right now, I think is disgusting.
Me
It's
too.
like very obviously a PR campaign in order to fundraise. She saw that the Trump campaign was successful in airing that, anti-trans ad against Kamala. And so she's jumping on that wagon, trying to exploit it for her own reasons. But I honestly don't care about the bathroom issue much. I respect other people who might disagree with me. I think the locker room issue, though, is a difficult question. And I do not like the fact that the left just totally threw women under the bus in general. Like, they don't care about what they think. They don't care about how uncomfortable they are. They don't care about the lack of fairness when it comes to the sports issue. It's like they do this weird identity hierarchy, and the group that they consider to be the most oppressed gets to say and get everything they want. And I totally disagree with that. I think it's a weird way of doing things. But the other thing is the closed-mindedness, the bigotry toward Latino men now because they, broke for Trump.
We always knew this about them, that they were, a bunch of macho Neanderthals. All of a sudden, this is the narrative.
Yeah, I can't stand it. So like, they need to do a lot of like looking inward and figuring out like what happened to us and why is this our identity now? Because they're the ones who are coming across as closed-minded and in some cases very bigoted.
Yeah. I also thought it was really interesting the way that the Democrats still thought or think that the abortion issue is really the central issue for women. And that's something that that kind of caught me off guard too, because I'm of that generation where it is central. Like, if you give money to Planned Parenthood and support abortion rights, that means that you are like, an ambitious woman doing something with your life. Like, and kind of over the last just few years, even the trans issue has really sort of elbowed abortion off to the side. And did that surprise you, or have you been noticing that sort of slowly?
Yeah, I have noticed that. I mean, there have been some interesting changes with like Planned Parenthood. They've definitely pivoted more toward gender medicine after the reversal of Roe. But, going back to the Democrats and how they thought this was going to be a central issue, I mean, it just goes to the fact that they're super out of touch, and they haven't really spent much time getting to know the electorate. That's what scares me about the Democratic Party, right? Like, they don't have their finger on the pulse. They're totally oblivious to what voters are experiencing, what their genuine concerns are. And I think that came across in some of the economic messaging from the Biden campaign and from Kamala Harris. Like, stop touting these economic metrics that don't really translate to ordinary Americans. So when you're bragging about how well the GDP is doing, Americans are not going to be feeling that wonderful economy when they're paying like double the price for eggs or common staples in their kitchen. Like, they're just so out of touch, Meghan. Like, I don't know if they're going to wake up to that. I really want them to. But so far, I am hearing a lot of like, oh, it's because Kamala was a Black woman. That's what it was all about. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the reason why Trump won this election.
No,
there's a lot more to it.
I think a lot of people on the right would be happy to elect a Black woman if she was a Black woman on the right. I think Condoleezza Rice could have won an election. I mean, maybe not in the last few years, but certainly over the last 20 years. And there's a number of women of color. I mean, I think Nikki Haley could have won. She was on the Republican ticket.
I mean, maybe, but that's the thing about the Republican base now. I mean, they think of Nikki Haley as a neocon.
Yeah.
It would be hard to believe they would see Condoleezza Rice as anything different. So I don't know if they'd be able. I mean, I don't think they'd win the nomination. I mean, clearly Nikki Haley didn't. I don't think Condoleezza Rice could either.
No, right.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah. So you really think that the majority of people who identify as Republicans are MAGA Republicans?
I think the majority of Republican voters are different in wanting the Trump flavor of the party as opposed to like the Bush era of the party. Definitely.
Right. Yeah. Do you think there's any hope for a third party? Because I think that's where people are trying to get with this? Like, I'm hearing a lot of like, okay, Trump is dangerous, but this is like what we have to get through in order to get to this other place. Like, we are just going to have to like, cross our fingers and say a prayer. And on the other side of this, there's disruption that will end up being very positive, and there's innovation, and there's all kinds of things that we can't even imagine. Do you think that there's any validity to that?
We just don't have the political infrastructure set up to allow that to even happen, right? Like, the two dominant parties have totally captured how our elections play out on a state level, obviously, and on a national level. So, I mean, look at the games that were played, even when it came to Democratic candidates who wanted to challenge Biden in the primary. The DNC didn't even allow for a primary to take place until it was obviously too late and we saw what we were dealing with. But, just seeing what RFK Jr. was dealing with as like the independent third party candidate, right? Like the issues he was running into on a state level, because you have the, Democratic Party controlling some of the decisions that get made in regard to the ballots, like who shows up on the ballots, all of that stuff. So I don't think that our system is friendly or accepting of a third party candidate. I think the only thing that can happen is real transformation among the two political parties. And some of that transformation has already begun with Republicans. Democrats are still operating with the old way of doing things. And they've had the thinking that we can still do things the way we've been doing things if we just absorb the neocons who are disgusted with Trump. But the Democratic base doesn't want the neocons. No one wants the neocons. So that strategy has been fraught from the beginning. Who knows if the mainstream Democrats are going to realize that? Who knows if they're going to finally... My worry is that they're just going to drop some of the identity politics and just think that that was the only issue here. That wasn't the only issue here.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned RFK Jr. What do you think of this guy?
I'm going to be honest, he annoyed me throughout the entire election. I thought, like, he's got no chance. Why do I need to bother, like, dealing with this guy? He wants attention. And then when he dropped out, endorsed Trump, I saw him as like an opportunist who's looking for any way to accumulate power for himself. But what's done is done. I mean, he is Trump's nomination for HHS secretary, and that forced me to like look into him with like a more sober perspective. He's got things about him that I hate, but there are things about him that I really like. I like the fact that he calls out the corruption within the FDA. I like the fact that he cares about what we're eating and how it's actually making us sicker. So like, credit where credit is due. And, he did make clear that after he was tapped by Trump for HHS secretary, that he's not going to make vaccines unavailable for people. I was concerned about that. So that's a good sign. A lot of people are panicking about him, but out of the more controversial nominations, I would say he's my least concerning. The one I'm most concerned about is probably Pete Hegseth. So we'll see what happens with that pick.
What concerns you about Pete Hegseth?
Some of the provocative things that he said in the past about like what the role of the military can be. Like, it's interesting that like MAGA types like him because he's very much in line with neocons, especially his rhetoric from the past would indicate that. Obviously, there are some serious like allegations against him. And police reports have come out about what one woman described as unconsensual. He says is consensual. We have no way of adjudicating it. And I hate when these types of things happen because I don't know what to do with that. Like, I don't know. I don't have the media is not equipped to adjudicate whether or not he did something nefarious or illegal. So, there's that. But my concern is he was chosen for such an important role, right? Secretary of Defense. And I don't think he's qualified for that role. And I'm concerned about our national security because we've got a lot of enemies around the world. In some cases for good reason. Okay. And I'm worried about whether or not Pete Hegseth is equipped with the right skills, competence, experience in order to protect the country, so that's what I'm worried about.
I know you care a lot about education. You've talked about this a lot. You're very well versed in this. I don't know about you, but it was news to me that the Department of Education has only been around since 1980. I used to think it was shocking, the idea of getting rid of the Department of Education. That would be like, getting rid of the air we breathe or something like that. But presumably you know more about this than most people. What do you think of that prospect?
Well, I mean, I don't think we should get rid of the Department of Education. They actually do a lot more work on the higher ed level as opposed to grade schools. With that said, though, the Department of Education does provide about 10% of the funding for public schools around the country. 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. I mean, cutting that kind of funding from our public schools would be devastating. But state and local politics plays a much larger role in public education. And so that's just something to keep in mind. And most of the funding comes from things like property taxes, right? So, yeah, I mean, look, I have changed my mind on some of what happened during COVID when it comes to our public schools, especially in places like California. I do think they were shut down for far too long, and we're seeing the negative ramifications of all of that. And so I don't think that in that case, the teachers unions did themselves any favors, because a lot of people took their kids out of public schools and put them into private institutions because they were desperate. They're like, no, it's been too long. My kid needs to go to school. And this whole virtual learning thing isn't working out. So I don't know what the future holds, because I think we now see a far larger percentage of voters, and that's Republicans, sure, but also a higher percentage of Democratic voters who are totally on board with school voucher programs, which further strip public schools of the limited resources they have. So that scares me a lot, because if we have a situation where public schools are a thing of the past, well, what happens to people living in poverty? Are they going to have sufficient government assistance to put their kids in school? I doubt it.
Yeah, that one is really a tricky one.
Yep.
I feel like this is sort of like a I'm just shooting random political questions at you, but I have been very glad to hear you talk about housing, the cost of housing. What's really one of the root causes of housing unaffordability, which is private equity, buying real estate. Is this something that you have looked into, very specifically for stories? Are you planning on doing more of this?
I love the topic of housing. I've been covering it for many years. And, the private equity trend is relatively new. Prior to that, we were already having a huge issue with the lack of inventory of housing, right? Whether it's rental units or homes for middle-class families to be able to buy. And it's now been further exacerbated by the private equity firms. And what's so annoying is, we haven't heard anyone on a federal level address it or even acknowledge it until Kamala Harris did in the very beginning of her short campaign. And so I wasn't really warm to Kamala at all until she said that. And I was like, oh my God, she's acknowledging a very real problem. So there's a possibility that this is something that she would actually want to address if she got elected. But she mentioned it once or twice, and we didn't hear about it again. And she did the pivot to trying to attract or seduce the neocons. So all of the economic stuff kind of went out the window. I do think that the private equity issue needs to be dealt with on a congressional level. They need to pass laws to limit or ban this practice entirely. But that still wouldn't fix the problem. We do need to build more housing. That is a huge issue. What I don't understand, though, is why the YIMBYs, the yes in my backyard types, are obsessed with housing density, because I think we should build all types of housing, certainly in these urban centers, big cities. But not everyone wants to live like that. I don't want to live like that. The city is starting to suffocate me. I do want to live in the suburbs, and I'm not ashamed of that. I do want to have a single family house. I do want to have a yard. I do not want to live in a building, and I don't want to deal with an HOA. We deserve that. Okay. It's the freaking American dream. And so for all the YIMBYs out there, they need to understand part of the reason why people reject you guys is because you think we're all going to be happy living in these tiny cubes in a giant building. And
Austria.
We're not.
Isn't this what it's like in Vienna? Yeah. Vienna is the gold standard in this. Yeah. Well, I know a little bit about this because embarrassingly, I attempted to build a house myself. And so in Los Angeles. And so I know more about this than I wish I did, but I think part of it is that, especially post-COVID and even before then, the cost of the supply chain is such that the cost of construction makes it really not feasible to build something that is not going to then sell for like millions and millions of dollars. Builders don't have much incentive to build small houses. I mean, there's a reason that all the new builds that you see are like 2,000 square feet and over, because that's the only way they can recoup their expenses. It's a really messed up situation. I don't understand why everybody needs to live in a huge house. I can understand wanting to have space around you, but
I just want a cute little 15 square foot home, literally like a home like the one I grew up in as a kid, in like a super working class community. And I'm so ashamed of myself because I remember when the housing market crashed and I had I'd already started my career, but I didn't have the capital to take advantage of that situation. I didn't put it, I don't have a 20% down payment.
Right.
And my dad told me, he's like, look, this is your opportunity and I will help you, but you have to live in the same neighborhood you grew up in because we want you to be close by. And I said no, because I thought it was I'm too good for it. And I've regret it every single day. You didn't want to
live in the valley? Is that
I still live in the valley, but now I have a condo and I could have had a home, like an actual standalone single residential house, but it's okay. There's made my mistakes.
There's nothing worse than real estate regret. We all have it. There's certain neighborhoods I can barely stand to drive through because I thought, I remember looking at that house at that time and thinking it was too far away or something. From what?
Let me tell you. I remember at the height of the collapse, there was this home in the Sherman Oaks Hills. It was this beautiful 2-story home, beautiful pool overlooking the entire valley. And it had been foreclosed. So obviously tragic, but at the same time, it was on the market for $700,000. It's now a $5-6 million home. It's just crazy. So lots of regret.
Oh yeah. I can't tell you the number of $700,000 houses I looked at and said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
Yep.
What a rip. Yeah. Well, so to close out here, I want to know your thoughts about where media is going. I think you're uniquely positioned to talk about this because you've been on YouTube for a really long time. The Young Turks was, a pioneer in this kind of new independent media space. Now we have a million Substacks and podcasts and everybody sort of hanging up a shingle. It's not really sustainable, I think, long term, at least with all these different moving pieces. But I don't really know what the alternative is because obviously legacy media is on its way out. I mean, there are Substacks that have higher traffic than what we used to consider really mainstream media outlets. So what do you think about that?
Well, I'm a little bit worried. I agree. It's not sustainable. And so when you have all these independent journalists kind of branch off and have their own subscriber supported content, I mean, it's scary because where do people go to get all of their information, right? They're going to have to piece together, which journalists, and I don't know if Americans really have enough time to do that. So I do worry about people becoming less informed because they're going to have to piece together this fragmented media landscape. At the same time, though, legacy media, I think, is failing because the public in general lost support or lost trust in these institutions. I'm seeing some of them pivot to more balanced reporting, accurate reporting, as opposed to doing things like taking Trump out of context to make him sound like Hitler. That kind of stuff, I think, led to the distrust. I don't know if they're going to be able to pivot in time to survive. I think the MSNBCs are done for, but I do see a difference in the way the New York Times is reporting. I'm seeing a similar change even over at CNN. I don't think they get everything right, but you can tell they're making a concerted effort to be open to different voices and do a better job in nuanced reporting as opposed to taking a side and very obviously doing propaganda for a side. Even the LA Times, right? The LA Times lately has been reporting on stories that before the election, they would not have been reporting.
Oh, like what?
acknowledgement of like, oh yeah, it turns out that crime's kind of a problem. Like, congratulations, guys, you're doing a good job. Like they totally gaslit people in LA, like for so long about what was going on locally. So I'm starting to see some changes. If they right their wrongs, who knows? Maybe they can build back up again. But yeah, I worry because a lot of these Substacks and a lot of these podcasts and all of that, they're not out there gathering the news.
Right.
Like, I want to be clear about that. We can't do anything we're doing without the actual journalists out there who are going out, in some cases, even risking their lives, in the case of war reporters, to get us accurate information. Without them, what are we doing? We're just this giant circle jerk about things we're speculating about.
Yeah. I mean, I guess people could report from their desks based on tweets from people in those war zones and other places. I mean, I'm just afraid it's going to be it's going to be, the sourcing is going to be memes and tweets.
And that's not really news, right? Like,
no, it's
on the field reporters are, in my opinion, the real journalists, right? So like when anyone refers to me as a journalist, like I feel a little bit like a stolen valor or something. The people out there talking to people in real life, gathering the news, those are the real reporters. Those are the real journalists. We need them. And so as much as I feel frustration with legacy media and like what they've done over the last several years, I don't want them to go under, because I do think we need a place to get accurate reporting and a place for reporters to do their jobs and publish their work.
What would you tell somebody starting out now as a journalist? Somebody came to you and says, I want to do this work. I want to do what you do. What would you advise them?
When I was in college for journalism, my absolute favorite journalism professor, her name's Linda Bowen, first day of class wrote $40,000 on the whiteboard and said, how many of you here are pursuing journalism for fame? Bunch of people raised their hands. How many of you are pursuing it because you think you're going to be rich or you think you're going to be like Ryan Seacrest? Bunch of people raised their hands. She pointed to the $40,000 and said, if you're pursuing real journalism, you're lucky if this is the amount of money you're going to make a few years into your career. Real journalists are not going to be rich. They're going to care about getting people accurate information more than anything else. Just make sure you're pursuing this for the right reasons, because it's a difficult line of work to get involved in. You're going to be evaluated daily, not just by editors or your boss, but by your readers and viewers. It's a difficult job and there's significant downsides. You just have to make sure you're going to do it for the right reasons, because that's the only thing that'll keep you in the game.
That's very good. And I would also add that in this economy, you have to work all the time. Like, yes, you're not only reporting your stories, you are doing social media, you're tweeting out your stories. You have, in addition to the Young Turks, you're doing your Substack. I mean, I think we should be clear. You didn't leave the Young Turks to start a Substack. You are doing both. So how is that going? How do you even manage your time? Like, how do you do that? It's so
hard. So TYT takes up a lot of time, and so it's difficult for me to produce as much content as I want to produce on my Substack, but I'm managing. I'm doing, a weekly podcast episode of my own, because I needed a space to just fully be me without worrying about there's some topics, like you mentioned how much I'm into like some of the municipal issues. It's not really a good fit for the Young Turks, right? And so when I want to talk about some of the corruption in Chicago, or when I want to talk about some of the terrible laws that have been passed locally in LA, like the Substack's a better place to do that. But it also allows me to have like long form conversations without worrying about format and all of that. So for me, this is really like a passion project and something that I've really enjoyed, but it is difficult juggling both things and ensuring that like my subscribers feel that their, willingness to follow my work is worth it, So, yeah. But I love it so far. It's such a wonderful platform. And I've found people like you on Substack. So I really love it.
Yeah, it's great. And actually, with so many people leaving Twitter, I'm finding that there's a lot of activity on Substack just in the last couple of weeks. It's exciting. I'm excited to sort of be more present there. Well, your Substack is great. You do such rigorous work, and I always just really appreciate everything you do. And thank you for taking time out to talk with me. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, this was a blast. I love your work. So thank you, Meghan. And let's keep in touch. I got to have you on my podcast.
Absolutely. Anytime. All right. Take care, Ana. Thank you so much. You've been listening to the Unspeakable Podcast. To support the podcast, go to megandaum.substack.com or theunspeakablepodcast.com and become a paying subscriber. That gets you access to all of the episodes in their entirety, as well as to my writing and lots of other perks. You can also check out The Unspeakeasy, my free speech women's community, at theunspeakeasy.com. We have in-person retreats all over the United States, a membership-based online community, and also some stuff that includes guys, like courses and occasional co-ed retreats. And by the way, we often have guest speakers that have been guests on this very podcast. So check that out at theunspeakeasy.com. I will be back next week with another super nuanced guest. Thanks for joining me. See you then. Thank you.